this is an impromptu video thing. I thought I would show you something that I've been working on for a client. In fact, the client is one of my patrons. A lovely man. I shan't name them because I don't want to embarrass them, but they know who they are. And it's a client who lives in the United States of America. And this client asked me, would I be interested in creating an Imagi-nations Map for them and doing some work on the imaginations that I create to kind of get some, army regimental standards going, maybe a few uniform details, maybe create a few personalities. He asked me if I'd be interested in doing that. What do you think I said? I said, what? Of course. Of course I said yes. I do this stuff for free for myself, so someone offering to actually pay me to do it is like dream job. I'm getting an idea of what it must be like for Alyssa doing her amazing maps and stuff, with companies saying, oh, would you do this for us? And she's thinking, yeah, okay. So what can I say? I said yes, and we agreed on a budget, an approximate budget, and agreed on the extent that the work would have, the project would have. In fact, I'm sure you won't mind me saying that he was very enthusiastic, this gentleman, lovely guy. And I said, right, well, what I need you to do is send me a short list of the stuff you'd like me to do for you. So a couple of days later, this message arrived with lots of stuff on it. A huge wish list of stuff. So we had to have a conversation where I pointed out to him, I need to tell you that you've just given me like 5 years work, because there was a lot on the list, because obviously he'd looked at what I do for my own Wars of the Faltinian Succession stuff. I thought, oh yes, I'd like some of this and I'd like some of that, drew up a shopping list. Wonderful. And then I had to point out to him, but yeah, I started doing this back in 1981, 82. So that represents like 30 odd years work, 35 years work that's gone into the world that I've created so far, and it's still not finished. So yeah, we had a conversation about, managing expectations and brought things back to a kind of more realistic level. And that's great. So I set to, the gentleman sent me a deposit. Marvellous. It's all been done pucker through my graphic design company. And so I set to work. And the first thing I do always is I start with a pencil and paper. It's just what I like to do. And you can see, hopefully the cursor is visible as I waggle it around. This that you can see on my big iMac screen in the middle here, this is basically a scanned in sketch that I made literally with a pencil on a piece of A4 paper, just kind of doodling around, having fun, creating some, waggly coastlines and things. The brief was to come up with something that was sort of Europe-ish. We had a discussion about the kind of imaginations that he had in mind, and so the brief was to come up with something that resembled, however vaguely, sort of resembled Europe with Scandinavia and a bit of North Africa, that kind of vibe. So I just kind of riffed on that theme, like a musician hears a tune and thinks, well, I like that tune, but obviously I don't want to just copy that tune. So I'm going to kind of tweedle around, strum about a bit, and come up with something that's sort of recognisably similar, but certainly not the same. So here we go. I mean, it's fairly obvious just from this scribbly map that there's something resembling a badly mauled United Kingdom up here. There's something resembling kind of bits of Scandinavia-ish polar regions here. I've played a bit fast and loose with kind of Northern Europe, so I've taken what I thought might be something a bit Netherlands-ish, a bit Hollands-ish, and sort of broken it off and made it as a big island in what would have been kind of the North Sea, but it's stuck there in the middle. This area I'm seeing as kind of Belgium-ish. This main area is sort of France-ish. Then of course we have something down here which is sort of Spain and Portugal-ish. Something here that's a bit Italy-ish, something that's a bit Greece-ish, and so on. So, you know, this would be Central Europe, kind of Poland, Hungary, that Bulgaria, that sort of area, moving over to, you know, Russia, the ex-Soviet countries. Somewhere in the middle here would be kind of a Germany-ish sort of thing. I've given a very rough indication of the sea just by some scribbles there, and some very rough indications indeed of where there's going to be kind of mountainy areas. You know, literally scribbly. So that's, I don't know, an hour or two's just tootling around. So then, of course, I scan that image and I bring it into Adobe Photoshop. Now, as it happens, this is a big image because I wanted to give Chris the opportunity to be able to zoom in quite a long way. So the final dimensions, maybe I can bring them up. The final dimensions of this map are, let's have a look here if I can, is that the right key command? Here we go. Can you see up in the top right hand corner here? The actual map, just in its normal image size, is 115.9 megabytes, and it measures 11,023 pixels square at 300 dots per inch. Now 300 dots per inch is print resolution. And I wanted to do a print resolution because I thought one of the things he might want to do with the final map is actually go send a file to his local printers and get the thing physically printed out to put up on the wall, because he plays war games and he's going to be doing these campaigns with his young sons. And wouldn't that be wonderful if they can actually pin this map up on the wall or roll it up and keep it in a, you know, a big tube somewhere in a drawer so they could bring it out for doing the campaign stuff on. So if we translate that to actual, well, let's do it in inches first. So basically it's 36 inches square, just over 36 inches square, 3 feet square, just under a metre. If I do that in millimetres, yes, it's 933.28 millimetres square. So it's a big old beastie. It's a big old beastie. And as I add stuff to it, it grows and grows and grows in size, which is something I've been experiencing. In fact, it's grown so big that I've not been able to store it in a normal Photoshop format. And people who've used Adobe Photoshop will know the normal thing is it's a .psd file, Photoshop design file. I've actually had to store this as a PSB file, which is its large format file saving thing. So I'm going to have to find a way when it comes to outputting it for the client that he'll be able to open it on something more manageable at his end when it finally crosses the Atlantic. But anyway, that's how big it is. So let's get out of there. Excuse me, bit of a frog in my throat this time of day. I've just been cheering for the NHS. So, in fact, I played the bugle for the NHS. I think that shocked the neighbours a bit. Someone else got out a cooking pot down the road and started whacking that with a large spoon by the sound of things. So we had a bit of fun. Anyway, here we are in Photoshop. And over on the right hand side, I'm waggling. You can see here the different layers that I've added to make up the finalized map. Now, I'm not going to go through the drawing process individually here. I might do that some other time or create some kind of tutorial thing for that. But let's just say that's the background, and I've got another layer over the top of that, which is just plain white, just to cover that up. So the first thing I'm going to reveal to you is I then traced over that approximately traced over that to create this, the outlines. And you can see the A4 piece of paper. Maybe if I turn off the background white, you can see there the edges of what the A4 piece of paper was. So I've gone way beyond that, north and south, and a bit west and east, just to give it a bit of elbow room. That's how I would put it. So let me cover up the background drawing again. So you can see there the basic twiddly outline. And as Slarty Bartfast said in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, oh yes, did you ever see Norway? I won an award for the fjords. And it was a bit like that. I had great fun just thinking what you need up here is waggly coastline. There's a hint right at the top of a kind of Arctic Ocean-y thing up there. A hint over here of, could that be sort of a Greenlandy place? A lot of sort of North Africa-ish area down the bottom. And yes, there we go, all the Central European countries. The Baltic, what would have been the Baltic, has got a bit mashed up and squished up. I wanted to make it more interesting. I wanted to add these choke points that you can see me sort of waggling at here. There's a really narrow, almost a northern Dardanelles choke point there that probably in winter freezes over and you can actually march your armies across. That's going to provide some interest, I'm sure. And here we go, going up into the kind of Baltic, what would be the Baltic states, Russia area. There's a big inland sea here. It's going to make it easier if I turn on the sea level. There you go. So you can see where I've added major river mouths and things, major lakes, inland seas, all that kind of thing. It becomes more obvious down here that, there's something resembling the Nile, maybe, plus some other major rivers. Britain is very raggedy. It looks like Scotland, and the Hebrides are kind of had the head blown off almost at the top there. Wales is looking a bit raggedy. Even the UK has got this, I don't know why. It just inspired me to say, what if there was this big river mouth that kind of carved up southern England, that sort of area, a bit more? So, would there be distinct differences between the two halves? See, your mind just goes off when you do this kind of thing. You just do a little twiddle on your, with your pen. And I'm using, I'll hold this up to the screen. I've got a pad here and pen. I don't have a fancy thing like Alyssa has. That's a major investment. But if this is a Huion, is that how you pronounce it? Huion? Sort of A4 size pad with a stylus. And it works fine. It allows me to, the lines I've been using for that outline is only about like 2 pixels wide, 3 pixels wide. So it allows me to get very, very twiddly as if it was a very fine, a drawing pen or pencil. So there's the land. And then other stuff started happening. I've done things in an interesting thing. I created a grid. Now, each of those squares, if I turn on the scale, that is 250 miles. Up here you can see, so 0, 50, 100, 150, 200, 250 miles. So each of those grid squares is actually 500 miles. So that makes the UK from tip to tip about what it is, isn't it? Like 700 odd miles, 750 miles, something like that. France is proportionally small. I'm calling it France. I'm giving it other names, but let's call it France. And it is smaller than it actually is. Spain, Portugal area is smaller than it is. Scandinavia, that northern tract, is a lot bigger. Now, why have I done that? Well, in the process of the conversation, the client said, actually, they're quite interested in the Great Northern War and stuff. So I've sort of taken him literally. What if there's a Great Northern War? Because it's actually a much bigger sort of chunk of territory. So I think they're probably going to have fun with that. And then there's this swathe of kind of Western, Central, and then Eastern Europe. And, of course, this big swathe of a hot continent down the south. So I think, that they're going to find that useful. One of the other things that I did, I'm going to open up the next thing I did, because I wanted to give an indication of climate. So if I open this next file, oh look, it's all in colour. The reason I did this was to, give, perhaps it's obvious, but it was to give an indication of the climatic change from kind of the polar north through to kind of the more temperate middle zones down to the much hotter south. And since the distance from edge to edge is about 3,000 miles, that's about right. So we're looking at what would be probably, if we looked at a globe, this is like a quarter of one side of the globe, something like that. So it's quite a big chunk of territory. In fact, it's an enormous chunk of territory. It's 3,000 miles square, which is, rough calculation in head, that's something like, is that 9 million square miles? It's big. Wow, it's big enough that if you're doing a campaign, if you only had two opponents, you might miss each other quite easily. But yeah, there you are. That gives an indication. I think it's quite pretty. But because they're going to be doing their campaigns actually set in the sort of 1685 through to 1770 kind of era, focusing primarily, to start with at least, on the first part of that, so kind of like the wars of Louis XIV area, Malburian Wars, that kind of thing. I'm sure someone will shout out the War of Jenkins Ear. But anyway, so I wanted to do that to give an indication of climate, as if someone in a modern atlas had gone, oh yes, and this was an indication of the climate during the time of this thing. And obviously, I've also, didn't take too much work to just give an indication of the shallow inner waters near the coast compared to the much deeper waters further out. So certainly over here in the west, there's an indication that, whoa, there's a big ocean here, equivalent of the Atlantic, right? What I've not said, or, we've not investigated yet, is whether there's anything the equivalent of the Americas on the far side of that. Maybe it's something completely different. Maybe aliens live there. Who knows? But here you go. It gives you a nice indication of the land and the sea and so on and so forth. But the main map, I've reverted to black and white because the intention is for it to look much more like an old map. So that kind of dictated the styles I was going to take from this point on, because some of you probably know, if you remember things like my Dalia Chindristan maps that I did for the Aiton campaigns a couple of years ago. Wow, that got incredibly detailed and ended up being like, a proper atlas. It was a huge amount of work, but I loved it, and I'm glad I did that. It's one of those things where I might revisit it and create maps based on that atlas style that looks more kind of old-fashioned map. And that's what I wanted for the client here. I wanted to create something that had a more old-fashioned feel. So one of the other things for a map, look up the top left, because I'm turning on the compass rose. Obviously, we need one of those because during this period they had very pretty compass roses. And the other thing I've done, if you look over to the top right, is I've put in an escutcheon, a map of Euperia, dated 1690. And that gives a clue now to the names of the places. But I'm going to, keep you waiting on that, because, first of all, to show that oceans are oceans, they used to do this. I plonked on a little cluster of ships just to show that's a ship floating on the ocean. I may add some more ships. I may change the ships. I may change the direction of the ships. I've not decided. I may put in some sea monsters. We'll see. Anyway, so we got to this stage. The next thing to put in was to indicate the high ground. And I started, hang on a minute, with, let's turn that off. I started with mountain areas. Can you see those? I'm going to zoom in. Here we are. Let me zoom in. So let's go into this middle region here. And what you can see is, look, big mountains, big pointy mountains. These are just outlines. I haven't shaded them yet. There's quite a lot more work to do in shading them. But these are the big pointy mountains, and you can see, oh yes, a sort of Scottish, Welsh, Snowdonia-ish, Highlands areas. I've put in a bit of high ground in southern this island here as well. The Scandinavian-ish area. Oh yes, your fields are the result of mountains. Lots of mountains near the coast, some inland. And this is one of the tricks is, okay, you don't just plonk mountains randomly. They form ranges. So you start to immediately get the impression of kind of the uppy downiness of the land. And logically, where there's inland lakes, big rivers, they come from high ground. Rivers don't flow uphill, right? So the source of the rivers is going to be somewhere where there's high ground. So that was the first stage, was just, getting my head around, okay, I've done this fabulous coastline with these waggly, great big rivers. They've got to come from somewhere. And the answer is they're coming from, mountain ranges where the floodwaters and stuff feed down into them and so on. These lakes as well, there's going to be some high ground. Because also, high ground is going to dictate where any smaller rivers run to or from. Obviously, a sort of dividing line, useful as a dividing line between major geographical areas. So what's going to be sort of a Russia-ish area over here. I thought, well, that'd be good to have sort of a mountain range running down there. Something down here, kind of we're getting into Balkan-y type areas. And when you think of somewhere like Greece, it's pretty rocky and hilly. Some of the islands as well are rocky, whereas some are more flat. Down here, we've got kind of the Nile Basin and a bit of mountainishness going there. And also down at the source of these rivers, you can see me waggling here. Down at the source of the rivers, there's going to be something, all around here that makes where I've plonked water courses and stuff a bit more logical. Here we are in this kind of Hispanic area. Again, with some mountain ranges. And, of course, right bang in the middle here, the equivalent of the Alps and the Apennines running down the spine of this slightly Italian-looking country. With some nice big lakes and so on. Right? Whereas some of these other bits are flatter. And this area, much flatter. So that's the mountains. The next thing I did was add some hills, so they're just lower and more rounded. But of course it means that you don't just go from flatland to mountains. You tend to have foothills. Not always. There are some pretty dramatic ups and downs up here in Scandinavia, but other areas, more gentle hills, that kind of thing. Or you have the big tall mountain ranges but with smaller hilly areas leading up to them or around them. It just makes the landscape much more interesting, more complex, of course. Here in this Britishy type of area, yes, there's, some biggish mountains up the top, but far more kind of hilly areas. All right. And again, I'm trying to be logical about, well, if there's that big rivery there that's going to have a foothillsy source and so on and so forth. Don't forget, we're looking at this at 50% scale on my computer. If I zoom right in, you get a better picture. Here we are, this dividing line between the sort of France-y country and the sort of Spain-y country. And one of the things that the client and his sons are going to have fun with is, when they get round to it, marking in their own wurgly routes, trying to find the passes through these mountains, right? That's going to be part of what they could do. Because obviously, the client could carry on paying me a lot of money over a long period of time, and I will happily just completely populate this world and work out everything, every single detail for him. But the fun, of course, a lot of the fun is I give them a starting point from which then they can add on their own invention and make it theirs. Because this isn't my map, you know. I'm the enabler. I'm creating the beginnings of the map, but then it's theirs. They've got to take it over from then. Okay. So here we are. There's all the hills and things marked in, which then the next logical thing was to add in other rivers. So we've got the big, obviously, woof, crikey, that's a big old, you know, chunk of land that's fallen into the sea. But then we have these, if we look up here in the, you know, the corner, it's Scandinavia type area. The river's wiggling to logical destination. So if you've got a big lake up in the mountains, it drains down from the very high ground, you know, where it's trapped, down through fissures and comes out, you know, and, you know, becomes bigger. So starts widdly at the top and gets bigger. And I may add some more thickness to the kind of mid parts of some of these. So there we are, big lakes draining out, some of the big lakes connected. Some, like here, of course, flowing north to this sort of Arctic Ocean area. So most of them heading south, but some of them, because this is a big area of high ground, heading off north. Okay. And you can see as I skim around the map here, lots of these more wiggly. I mean, you just have fun. You get your pen and you go waggly and make them meander a bit. Okay, then we come down onto this more European. Some of them are tiny. I don't know if you can see up here in this area here. There's big cracks there, but then the actual length of the rivers coming down from the mountains, relatively short. Then we come into this sort of northern European area, and here we are. So these big mountains here mean that the land is kind of tipped facing north, so the rivers are going to flow north from there. Okay, then we get some excitement because, of course, in this big central alpine area where the, you know, part of the planet has just got heaved up by earthquakes or volcanic activity or whatever it was millions of years ago, has created this big sort of high ground plateau. Some of it's still pointy and quite young. So there's water running off in all directions from here. Some of it's running north and joining this kind of North Sea area. There's also some little lakes that kind of feed in, heading towards the mouth of the river. Some these rivers are coming south, going down to this sort of Italy-ish looking place, which has got lots of lateral rivers, echoing the real Italy, of course. One of the things that people who've, you know, the Allies invading Italy from the south found that, wow, those blooming rivers. And the Germans would dig in and defend a river line, and it would be enormously costly to try and dig them out. So they'd have a little mini invasion to try and go round, and the Germans would retreat to the next river line, and so on and so forth. So anyone foolish enough to try and invade this country from the south is in for big trouble. But there we go. And, you know, here we are in the France area where you've got something a bit like, you know, so this one, coming down from the Alps, a bit like the River Rhine, something like that. Here we go through France, you've got the Seine or the Meuse or whatever, right? And again, in the not too many rivers in the middle of Spain. I'm seeing this as quite a dry, arid area, as indeed is the case in real Spain. Then I've got a mad thing happening, going, whoa, wiggly round kind of this central European area. Obviously, intention is a bit like the Danube, right? So it's following a big, windy course in what is, you know, great big open plains and things, the kind of thing that hussars and nomadic tribes would love. Obviously quite fertile around here, so this is going to be a big area potentially for campaigning, a lot of open ground. And again, don't forget the scale. We're looking at each of these squares is 500 miles square. 500 by 500 is, how's my brain, 25,000 square miles, 2,500 square. It's a lot. And that's a lot. So, the client and his boys are going to have plenty of time to work out, oh, well, there's little villages here, little towns there. And yes, there's little tributaries running down to this big major Danube-like river. And then there's going to be little tiny streams running down to them. Once they actually start getting into kind of battlefield-sized maps, you add as much detail as you'd like. And bit by bit, like a giant patchwork quilt, this is going to add up to being a highly detailed map. So there's the kind of wiggly rivers and stuff. Now let me zoom out to get the whole thing in the screen, because the next thing I haven't done, if you've seen the cursor go over to the marshes, I haven't added any of that yet. Trees for forests and major areas of woodland, I haven't added that yet either, but you can imagine there's going to be a fair amount around, skirting around the mountainous areas and what have you. That I will get around to. But the next thing is I named the countries. Ta-da! So effectively we have 3 continents. We have Skirnia, we have Euperia, which is the main part of interest, and this kind of Britannia big island here is kind of considered part of Euperia. I'm sure there's lots of Brexit arguments that can be had. It's like, is it really? It looks far enough away that it's a whole thing of its own. Let's not have that argument. But there's Euperia, and I was like, I'm just going to come up with something daft for down the bottom. So we have the Hal Empire. Should we start there with the names? So we have Hello There. We have half portion, we have halitosis, we have halberd, and we have half pay. I was just having a mad moment. I think it was getting late. I'd been working on the names till about 3 in the morning, and I was thinking, do you know what? What this needs is something just completely silly. The client, of course, can change these names at any time, but he seems to have accepted them so far, even though apparently the halitosis bit caused quite a loud groan from his sons. But he likes it, so hey. So let's start up at Skirnia, where we have Svedveg, we have Valland, we have Lundlund, we have Harjumpalund, we have Vekalond, and we have Lösterlund. Right? Now, people that know me well know that I love languages. So actually, most of these were the result of quite a lot of having a bit of a play with Google Translate and my dictionaries, and also bringing in some other puns. I mean, Svedveg is just like, it's like a Swedish sounding thing. I just like the sound of Svedveg. Valland, well, are any of you fans of Nordic noir crime drama? You'll know of Wallander. And those of you who like the Danish, because he's Swedish, and then over the road in Denmark you have Sara Lunt, who was the lead detective in the Bridge, right? So we have Lundlund, and then I thought, well, let's see, are there other famous Scandinavian crime writers? And it turns out, yes, that a famous person in Sweden, in Finland, is someone called Harjunpa. I think that's the name of a lead detective in a series of crime novels. So Harjumpalond, there we go. And then we have Vekalond, which sounds a bit sort of, it's to do with Vikings, isn't it? So Vekalond. And Lösterlund, which is like, sounds like lost land. So there we go. Probably I imagine Lösterlund to be a bit like sort of Finland, full of midges and not much else. Then we have Plattland here, the island in this area of sea here. Plattland, flat land, right? So it's a bit Dutch. Over here we have Celtigal, which is a mixture of Celtic and Gallic, kind of a name for a mixed tribe of Celts and Gauls who are probably still resisting, some of them. The people of Angloria, sounds a bit like England. But it's also, I wanted to convey something of the pomp of us English. We do reckon ourselves, don't we? So I thought Angloria, you know. Over here, Flemland. Flemish, Flemmen, get it? Then I had to come up with something here, and so I just got Mark, which is, I just sounded something that could be a mixture of Scandinavian and German. Up the top here, Brandenburg, like Brandenburg, kind of Prussia. Let's come down. Instead of France, we have Frisson, which has already raised a smile with some French people I know. Ooh, bit of a frisson. Then in the middle we have this Mittelreich Confederation, because just like you'd have, you know, the broken up kind of Holy Roman Empire, and in the 17th, 18th century, the middle of what would have been Germany and the borders with France was this polyglot mass of tiny principalities and electorates and dukedoms and what have you. So I've just turned that lot of them at the moment into a confederation. I haven't fully drawn the borders yet. That's going to be one of the last things I do. But inside the Mittelreich Confederation, this is something that the client can really let rip with, is you've got this big area of land, and you can just divide it up into lots and lots of tiny little, you know, smaller bits, but they all form a confederation. They formed an alliance of some kind, and they're going to need governing in some way, some kind of, you know, European Parliament almost. That's going to be up to the client. Below there, in the middle, where we have all this alpine stuff happening, I've just called it Strudel, as in Apfelstrudel. Just nice and short and sweet. Over to the east, we then have Polangaria, which is a mad mixture, as I said, of kind of Poland, Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania, right? Polangaria, which again, the client's at complete liberty to divvy that up into smaller things. My Russian equivalent, way over behind this range of mountains, I've called Rostevia. Okay. Further down, this sort of Balkany leading into what might be sort of a Turkishy, Byzantium sort of area, I've called it Sierbo-Türk. Right? An awful lot goes with the accent, right? If you can carry it off. Let's come back this side. We've got Hispanica, which is, you know, a Hispanic area. And a little enclave there called Castanya, because, you know, we're used to Catalonia and that kind of stuff where they speak a different language. And instantly, when I was doing all these translations, I was switching. So I went from a Spanish dictionary to actually a Catalan dictionary. And I considered having something with all sorts of X's that would be almost impossible to pronounce, but I settled on Castagna. The sort of Italy area, Parmigiano. That rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? Welcome to Parmigiano, where we have the best cheese in the world. Then we have this kind of Balkan area, kind of a bit of Greece, a bit of Albania, a bit of, you know, all that Balkan stuff. Gralbanikos. That's what that is. And then, of course, we've already had a look at the Hal Empire. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is pretty much where I am at the moment. There's a nice border that neatens everything up, but I'm going to put some distance markers on that, and I might put it outside so it doesn't cover too much up. Lots of trees to be done, and I may well do a short tutorial showing you how to do that kind of thing, both from scratch, and of course there are files you can buy. You can buy Photoshop or Adobe Illustrator brushes that enable you to knock out foresty areas quite quickly. And in fact, on this map, because we've sort of run out of budget, really, I should have, you know, stopped this. But yeah, hey, it's me. I like adding detail and going crazy, so I don't mind. I've got a lot of forest to add and a bit of marshland in various, you know, where you think there's going to be boggy areas. So I may well be using a commercial Photoshop brushes that I've bought. Yes, you actually buy and pay for the files that enable you to use different shaped brushes. So literally, you click your pointer on the map, and ta-da! A tree or many trees appear. But how to use them subtly, that's the skill, right? Because otherwise, after all this work, you can end up mullering your efforts. But anyway, I'm going to, just before I finish, I'm going to say, look down the bottom left-hand corner here, which gives you the file size as it is now with all the these layers switched on. And you can see it actually is at let's go down there, 1.44 gigabytes. So if you want to work on a map of this kind, you need a powerful computer, right? Because how many layers have I got there? Not a huge number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Well, that's each text thing is in a separate layer. Probably 20 or 30 layers. And the more layers you add and the more detail you add, the more the computer has to remember, and the more it gobbles up your hard drive space, and it gobbles up your memory, your RAM. So you need a pretty hefty computer to work on something like this. A little tiddly entry-level laptop, it's probably not going to do the trick. And this is, don't forget, I've deliberately just done this in grayscale. This is just in grayscale, not in colour. Right? If I was to be doing this in colour, it would be very enormous. And when I was first working on that sort of temperature map, which is in colour, things were slowing down quite a lot and making me think, oh, am I actually going to have to now buy a new Mac or rent a new Mac? But in grayscale, it's fine. It's fine. You just remember to save everything from the RAM to your hard drive, or the cloud, in fact, as I'm doing every so often. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed that little look around this map that I'm creating for one of my patrons. And the map I hope to have finished in the next couple of days, so then I can turn my attention to the other thing that he's asked me to do, which is to create some notable regiments. So make some suggestions for some uniforms, some regimental colours, that sort of thing, and maybe a few personalities, generals and what have you along the way. So I think I've got something like a day's budget for that, and me being me, I'll probably spend more than a day on it, but hey, it's good fun, isn't it? And at that point, the really strange thing for me is going to be, there you go, it's all yours. Good luck. Over to you. I'm really proud and chuffed at what I've done so far, but it's also very exciting. I mean, it's nerve-wracking, but also exciting when you then hand your baby over to someone else and say, there you go, I've just created a starting point for you, however detailed it may look. Obviously, as soon as we start zooming in, if I do another zoom in here, let's just do a quick zoom in to 100%. Just look at something like the map of Strudel, and that zone there. If you imagine the border's going to be sort of round here somewhere, following probably the line of the mountains or thereabouts. Just think, that's, as I said, that's that square in the middle there. That's 500 miles across. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or something like that. So if you imagine that divided up into 5 by 5, each of those sub squares is going to be how's my brain, 500, and I'm dividing it into 10. So a little bit like this, that's 50 miles square. Right, so then you zoom in further, 10 miles square, which is in there. Of course, something else he might choose to do for campaign purposes, the kind of thing I might do, is overlay a layer of hexes. Each hex being 5 miles across, 10 miles across, 50 miles across. You could go crazy. Obviously, to get campaigning done, you might say, well, actually, we're just going to focus on one of the big squares for the time being. And really, here's one right here, the border between, that sort of area, and overlay a hex grid over that for campaign purposes of the kind that I've described in my book and magazine articles, and take it from there, and then go and explore another part of the world. One of the things that of course could be very exciting is, let me zoom out again, if say the Anglorians decide we want a bit of empire, we're going to go and beat up these chaps in Hello There. And you've got a colonial campaign on your hands, with obviously supply lines potentially stretching back to Angloria. Wow, there's lots of potential, isn't there? This is why I find it as exciting as the client's finding it, because you're like, wow, just think of the games you could play on a map like this. Just think of the battles you could have in any of these vast areas. There's huge potential, even with something that, I'm looking at what I've done here and I'm thinking, oh, it's quite basic. It looks detailed in the big scheme of things, but when you start zooming in, you think, oh, where are all the little towns and villages? I mean, the next thing I'm actually doing is I'm placing the capital cities. I have come up with the names for capital cities, but I'm not going to reveal them here at the moment, because I've got to think about, okay, where would the capital of Svedveg be? Where would the capital of Harjunpalond be? Where would the capital of the main city of the Mittelreich Confederation be? And so on. The capital of Frisson. There's all these wonderful decisions. And I think that's one of the things I love about maps, is thinking, okay, if there's people actually living on that map, where are they living? Why would they be living there? Where would the main towns and cities be? Then, of course, how would they be connected? Where would the roads be? And so on and so forth. Okay? So, I hope you've enjoyed this. And I look forward to doing something else for you before too long. And most of all, I hope that my wonderful client and his sons have enjoyed watching this and understanding something about the process that has gone into creating this map of Euperia and its neighbours Skirnia and the Hal Empire. Thanks everyone. Take care.